What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. Today we're here to discuss Packers' upcoming offseason, specifically four roster personnel decisions that they're going to have to navigate in the coming months as free agency arrives. And the names that we're going to be discussing are all players who Brian Gutekunst discussed in his season-ending press conference last Thursday. So we'll dive into that. But first, you know what to do. Hit like on the video. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work, including the article versions of what we're discussing here today over at ESPNLacrosse.com. And my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app for all your Wisconsin sports radio needs. So like I said, last Thursday, Brian Gutekunst had a season-ending press conference, and over the course of that 35 minutes was asked about four different players that are either upcoming free agents, contracts in question, things of that nature. And so we'll dive into what he had to say about those players, perhaps giving us a little bit of insight into what's to come in the coming months. So first, let's start off with kicker Brandon McManus. McManus is set to be a free agent this offseason, and Brian Gutekunst was asked straightforward, would you like Brandon McManus back for the upcoming season? And Gutekunst, again, straight to the point, we would. And of course, understandably so, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. McManus provided that stability at the kicker position that Green Bay was searching for really since Mason Crosby retired. And what's a staggering number is that Brandon McManus was the seventh kicker on the Packers roster in some capacity last season, going back to January of 2024 through, I think, in October when McManus was signed. They had seven kickers on the roster, again, in varying capacities during the offseason, training camp, OTAs, into the regular season, because they were just searching for someone to step up and give them that reliable presence at the kicker position. And all of the young options, plus Greg Joseph, weren't able to do that for the Packers. But McManus did. He came in, he was 31 for 31 on the year on extra points. Only 14 kickers in all of the NFL last season made all of their extra point attempts. He was 21 for 23 on field goals overall. He had only one miss, I think 6 of 7 on field goal attempts from over 40 yards. And his field goal percentage of 91.3% was the 8th best in football. What McManus brings to the equation, because I know I talked about this when they first signed him. You look at his overall career numbers, and I think his make percentage is around 81, 82%. Like there's not elements of that are going to leap off the page and necessarily tell you who you're getting as a kicker. But there's two things that stand out about McManus in his career. One, the kicks you want or expect your kicker to make under 50 yards, really, really reliable. He's made 92% of his career kicks under 50 yards. In addition to that, he comes with big game experience under his belt. He was a part of that 2015, and I know it's a while ago, but he was a part of that 2015 Denver Broncos team that went through the playoffs and went on to win a Super Bowl. And in that playoff run, McManus was 10 for 10 on his field goal attempts. So bringing him back makes all the sense in the world. One, for all the reasons just mentioned, but two, we have to ask ourselves, what's the alternative here, right? Like, what is the alternative? The Packers go back to just searching and looking at young options at the kicker position to try to fill that role. But where the Packers are at in terms of wanting to compete for championships, that doesn't align with the ability to navigate the ups and downs that come with relying on a young kicker and going through that learning curve with them. I mean, we heard numerous times last year from Gutekunst, specifically Rich Bisaccia as well, I believe, that kickers transitioning from college to the NFL, it just takes time. And a lot of times those first stops that they have in their NFL careers don't always end up being, where they produce, where they make a name for themselves. But Packers don't have time on their side in that regard. They have to win now, so they can't navigate the ups and downs. They need a veteran presence, a steady presence like a Brandon McManus to just give them that stability at that position. That's absolutely what he did. And I know Matt LaFleur, I forget specifically, it was towards the end of the year, but he was asked about McManus and just his presence on the field goal unit. And LaFleur said, I don't even really watch field goals anymore because he knows that they're going to go through the upright. So it, again, makes all the sense in the world. And one of the more interesting elements, I think, and I touched about this in my article about McManus and Gutekunst's comments, is all the nuance that goes into the field goal operation. We know McManus as a kicker has obviously his track record, his experience, and what he's done in the NFL, but getting acclimated to Green Bay, a big part of that equation is working with Matt Orchek, the long snapper, and Daniel Whalen, his holder. And just some of the interesting nuance to that is, obviously we know the basic rule of thumb, laces out, right? But the tilt of the ball, where the laces are pointed, different things like that are part of something that every kicker wants it held a little bit differently. And with McManus, where they are on the field, not distance-wise, but hash-wise, all play into that equation as well in terms of how Whalen's supposed to hold the ball. So that was part of the learning curve for just that field goal operation with him coming to Green Bay. But I just thought that was interesting because, again, it's not something we talk about, not something that we think about very often. Now, in terms of what McManus's contract could look like, when he originally signed with Washington last offseason before being released for all the off-field stuff that happened, SpotTrack had that he had signed a $3.6 million deal for 1 year. So I think that gives us kind of at least a baseline. And compared to the rest of the NFL, that $3.6 million mark ranks right about in the average of kickers. So I think that could be a general landing spot for where McManus's contract lands, but certainly seems like someone who's going to be back with Green Bay in 2025 and probably beyond. All right, next up, we're going to put these two players together, Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, both first-round picks by the Packers in the 2021 NFL Draft. And so the decision that Brian Gutekunst has to make this offseason, both players are still under contract in 2025. They're going into the final year of their rookie deals. But the decision that he has to make is whether to pick up their fifth-year options for the 2026 season. And with every first-round pick in the NFL, teams get the benefit of being able to make those decisions, handing out a fifth-year option for the upcoming year. And by what Brian Gutekunst had to say, it sounds like Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker are definitely going to be a part of the Packers beyond just this upcoming 2025 season, the last year of their rookie deals. I mean, Gutekunst said he's super fired up about where Quay Walker is at, really impressed with the leap that he made this season. And we talked about this a few times here, especially during that second half of the season, that you really started to see the confidence, the comfort in Jeff Hafley's system, the comfort of being the Mike linebacker. And there's a massive, massive learning curve that came with that to a degree, position change, right? Still a linebacker, but a different role within the linebacker system that Quay Walker had to take on this year. It wasn't just learning Jeff Hafley's defense, it was being the quarterback of the defense, right in the middle of it. And I mean, I still remember Xavier McKinney after it was either the San Francisco or Miami game saying, hey, there were times when he was in New York that he had to be the green dot, the signal caller, and he goes, I get it. There's a lot that goes into that, right? I mean, it's not just relaying the play from the headset in his helmet to the rest of the defense. It's making sure everyone's aligned properly. It's making sure that any adjustments the offense makes, you're pointing them out. You're countering it with your own adjustments on the defensive side of the ball. Then as the play unfolds, you got to go make your play, do your responsibility. You get back up, and that entire process starts all over again. It's a lot of information, a lot of processing that happens in a very, very short amount of time. Naturally, there's a steep learning curve that comes with it, but as Walker got more reps on the practice field and in games, as he just got more comfortable with the responsibilities that came with that role, we really started to see the best version of Quay Walker that we've seen, I think, since he's entered the NFL. There were those handful of 3-4 game stretches prior to the injury against Seattle where he was operating at a really high level. There was a video here recently, I think going into the Eagles game, where I talked about where he ranked during that stretch of games. I mean, tackles, run stops, coverage. I mean, he was doing it all. Pressures, getting after the quarterback. He was doing a little bit of everything for this defense. You saw him as a blitzer. You saw him doing a really good job of shedding blocks, just his diagnosing of the play, identifying, getting to where the ball's going, fighting through blocks, shooting gaps, making tackles. He was doing a little bit of everything, playing at a high level, and obviously Brian Gutekunst took notice of that. Now, when it comes to Devontae Wyatt, Brian Gutekunst called him the most consistent interior pass rusher that the Packers had this season. According to Pro Football Focus, overall, Wyatt finished with 32 pressures, which was the third most on the team. But his win rate, how often he beat the blocker in front of him, of just about 13%, was the highest mark on this Packers team among defensive tackles and defensive ends. So that's the consistency that Gutekunst was talking about. He consistently, more than any other Packers defensive lineman, won his reps and got after the quarterback. And I think, too, we saw Devontae Wyatt really start to make strides this year as a run defender, because while the pass rush overall as a collective unit struggled this year, the Packers' run defense was really, really good. One of the top units in football in terms of yards per carry allowed. So Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker certainly sound like they're going to be, obviously they're going to be here for 2025, but it's Gutekunst's intention, his long-term plan, to have them here longer than that. Now, the way the fifth-year option works is it's a 1-year fully guaranteed deal, and the salary for that player is determined by a number of different factors. Any accolades that they receive, Pro Bowl, any or what their playing time is. So not every defensive tackle taken in the first round is going to earn the same amount of money on their fifth-year option. There's elements to it, again, rewarding players for playing time, level of play, all those different factors. But according to Over the Cap, Quay Walker's projected fifth-year option is $16 million for the 2026 season, so a 1-year, $16 million deal. Devontae Wyatt's is just over $13 million, so it'd be like a 1-year, $13 million deal. And because those are 1-year deals, there's no additional years to push cap charges to. Those would be the cap hits for those players in 2026. So what I think could potentially be in play for both those players is a similar situation to what we saw with Jordan Love. When the Packers had to pick up or make the decision on Jordan Love's fifth-year option going into the 2023 season, they came to a compromise, so to speak, right? They gave Love a 1-year extension that was, obviously gave him some security for that 2-year stretch, paid him some more money than he was obviously making on his rookie deal, and there were some incentives baked into there as well. I could see the Packers potentially looking into that alternative with either Walker or Devontae Wyatt, and it'll help their cap situation next year a little bit as well, which they're in good position overall. I'm not saying that taking on these cap hits, 16 and 13 million, is going to be, is going to hurt them drastically, but it gives them more flexibility. So just something to keep our eyes on, but it sounds like those two going to be in Green Bay beyond the 2025 season. All right, next up, Josh Meyers, Packers center, set to be a free agent this season, just finished up the final year of his rookie deal here in 2024. And Brian Gutekunst said he thinks it was Meyers' best year yet that he's had in his playing career. And when you hear Gutekunst, when you hear Matt LaFleur talk about Josh Meyers, I mean, he's a really, really, really important player to this team, and that goes beyond the football field. It's his role as a leader in that locker room. And I remember Adam Stenavich in 2023 saying that as that year went on, they could see Meyers taking on a greater leadership role within the offensive line room. But you hear about how Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, others talk about Josh Meyers. There is a high level of respect for him throughout that Packers team. And there's 100% absolute value in having that type of player on your football team. I mean, Brian Gutekunst called him an asset to the team. Matt LaFleur, a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago, called him a heart and soul type of player. Like, those are heavy words. Those carry a lot of meaning when you're describing a member of your football team in that capacity. He's a heart and soul type of player. I mean, on the football field, he has the trust, the rapport with Jordan Love, and I know his play throughout his career has been up and down, and fans are certainly aware and willing to point out the down points in his play. But when it comes to the center position, there's so much that goes into it pre-snap, right? It's the communication of responsibilities to the rest of the offensive line. It's setting protections. It's identifying what the defense is doing, calling it out, making adjustments as needed. There is such a much larger, responsibility that comes with the center role, other than what happens after the ball is snapped. And of course, not to downplay that component of it. It's a results-based league. How you perform on Sundays as the play's unfolding is ultimately, what's going to determine your playing time, new contracts, all that stuff. I'm not downplaying that whatsoever. But there's a lot of other factors that go into that position. And Meyers is really, really, really good at those pre-snap components, helping to get the offensive line on the same page, putting them in a position pre-snap to find success. And, what I think is going to happen here, we didn't get as much insight in terms of what direction the Packers are going to go, like we did with Wyatt and Quay and McManus. But what I think is going to happen, I think similar to John Runyon last year, I think the Packers are going to have, like they do, they're going to have their number in mind, years, dollar amount guarantees for Josh Meyers that they're willing to give him, and they're going to let him go test the free agent market. They'll ask him to bring back, what are the offers that you're getting, and then they'll see if there's something that they can work out with him. If the numbers, contract numbers, years, guarantees, all that stuff. If Meyers is getting more of that from other teams in the NFL, I do think that the Packers would be, I think they would be willing to step away and let Meyers move on to a new team. If what other teams are offering are in the ballpark for what the Packers are willing to give him, then I think there's going to be conversations and the Packers are going to do what they can to bring him back. But that's how I see things playing out. And let's just say Meyers ends up elsewhere in 2025. Then the question becomes, who's going to take over at center for the Packers, right? I think the obvious answer that many would say is Jacob Monk. Packers drafted him on day 3 in last year, and there's a lot to like about Jacob Monk's game. Super experienced player coming out of college. But one thing that's worth noting, right, and there were a number of games this year down the stretch where he was inactive, where he was a healthy scratch on game day. And of course, as a day 3 rookie on an offensive line unit that has its group, right, has its depth for the most part, that's not totally odd, right? There's going to be a learning curve for any player that's coming in, and just because he was a healthy scratch this year doesn't mean he can't go out and be the starting center in year 2. I'm not saying that whatsoever, but I think that does tell us something in the sense that he's not quite ready yet, right? He's not someone that the Packers would necessarily, be ready to rely on in a meaningful game situation to step in if needed. There's still learning that needs to take place. And again, that's not unusual by any means. Day 3 pick, that's expected, right? But my point with all this is I think because of that, we can look to and say, that doesn't necessarily mean that the job's just going to be handed to Jacob Monk. I don't think we're going to go into training camp next year and the presumption is going to be, well, he's a starter, and then see how things unfold. I think he's going to have to go out there over OTAs, training camp, the preseason, and earn that starting spot. I don't think it's going to be given to him. And one other name I'll throw out there, I think is a potential candidate for center, again, if Josh Meyers is gone, is Sean Rhyan. Packers worked him out there a fair amount during training camp this past year. And if Ryan slides over to center, that creates a path for Jordan Morgan to get on the field. You have Elton Jenkins at left guard, you have Jordan Morgan at right guard, you have Tom and Walker at your tackles, and you have Sean Rhyan at center. So that's, I think, an under-radar name to keep our eyes on for that center role. Again, if Josh Meyers ends up elsewhere. And again, when it comes to the offensive line, we know Brian Gutekunst is always going to add to it. There's that stretch of, 3 years in a row, 3 drafts out of 4, where he added 2 or 3 offensive linemen in each of those drafts. They're going to add to this position group. They're going to add another center to compete with Monk, with Ryan for that playing time. So that's where I see things standing. I think they're going to let Meyers test the market, bring back what the numbers are, and if it's in the range that the Packers have set, they'll try to work something out. And if not, I think they're gonna be willing to move on. All right, lastly, before we get out of here, let's talk about Jermichael Alexander. There's so much unknown ambiguity around just this entire situation that when there's ambiguity, speculation runs wild, right? Because there's a lack of facts to kind of help draw the path and lead the discussion around whatever it is that's taking place. So for this moment here, we'll try to live in what do we know right now. And what Brian Gutekunst said on Thursday when asked about Jair is, one, the injury component for both Jair, for the organization. Obviously, that's a frustrating, element to all of this. Over the last 4 years, Jair's played just 34 out of a possible 68 games. When he's been on the field, he's continued to play at a high level, but that availability consistently hasn't been there. And like Gutekunst said, that can obviously be a point of frustration for both Jair and for the team. And when asked about Jair, Gutekunst said that they'll work through that in the coming months. And he did say that there isn't any disconnect between Jair and the team. Now, while those are Gutekunst's comments, sitting there, I didn't exactly get the sense of things are good either. Again, we just don't know right now. There's just a lot of unknown, and of course that was fueled on the Monday after the Packers loss, where it was reported that Jair was in the locker room but said he didn't want to speak to media members, didn't have anything good to say about the team, didn't know if he was going to be on the team next year. So again, that just adds fuel to the fire that's out there. But the big question mark, obviously, is how could things have been handled differently with Jair and his injury? Could they have gotten the surgery sooner? Ultimately, that was what ended up needing to happen. The Packers tried to, obviously he didn't have it initially when it happened. He tried to rehab it and work through that way, and it did seem like things were trending in the right direction, right? Like he returned to practice the week of the Lions. The week after that, he went from being a limited participant to a full participant for a few days. The week after that, going into the Saints game, he was a full participant all 3 days, listed as questionable. It felt like they had gotten over the hump, but then he was ruled out for that Saints game. And then again, after that, going to the Vikings game, his progress in practice started to take a step back, right? He went from a full participant to a limited participant, not practicing, and then had to get the surgery. So obviously from the outside perspective, it looks like some sort of setback took place. And again, the big question is, should a surgery have been, should they have done surgery sooner? Again, we don't know the answer to that. Maybe things play out differently. Maybe they don't. Again, it's all speculation at this point. That's what a lot of this is. But there is definitely unknown around what Jair's future with the Packers is coming into this upcoming 2025 season. He has a cap hit of just shy of $25 million. If the Packers do move on from him, trade him, release him, whatever it might be, if they go down that path, they can save $6.8 million in cap space for this upcoming season. So those are obviously going to be decisions that the Packers are going to have to work through. I would imagine in a perfect world that they would like to have Jair back. Like if it were up to me, and again, if both sides want to work together, because that's obviously the key component here. If Jair's ready to move on, then he's ready to move on. But if things are broken and can be mended, I would rather have Jair on my team for an extra $6.8 million, even if I know maybe he's only going to play 10, 12 games, and just to have that talent, that type of player available to me. Now, regardless of whether Jair's back or not, Packers have to address the cornerback position. That doesn't change regardless of how this situation works out. They got Keyshawn Nixon, they got Carrington Valentine. Eric Stokes is going to be a free agent. Jair, again, we don't know what the future holds there. So they're going to have to add to the cornerback position this offseason. But Gutekunst sounded very, very or liked a lot what he saw from both Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine down the stretch. But you want competition, you want depth at that position group. So we'll see how all that unfolds in the coming months. So there you have it, my friends. I appreciate you tuning in as always. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com and download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Till next time, friends, take care.